All right, looks like we have a few people here already. Actually, quite a few people here already. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're very excited to present today's mini panel of what to expect in the first year residency. My name is Kevin Zahn. I'm one of the PGY5s at Ohio State. I'm the chair-elect for the section for residents and fellows, and we are so thrilled that you're here. So again, thank you for coming. And without further ado, I'd just like to introduce very quickly Dr. Albert Murati. He is a professor of laryngology at the University of Washington Medical School in Seattle. He wears a lot of hats there. He's also a previous president of the American Academy of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery, and as well as the American Bronchoesophagological Association. And so he is just an absolute champion for us trainees. He was very involved in the planning process for these seminars. So please, Dr. Murati, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Thank you to all our newest otolaryngologists. This is exciting. I can't remember exactly what it felt like right now, but I know I was excited and nervous and hopeful, and I felt like I belonged. So I don't know what is in everyone's mind, but I just want to congratulate you and celebrate you. And there may be folks on here who are interested in otolaryngology who maybe haven't matched yet, and that's cool because we'll see you soon enough. Congrats to Dr. Z and Dr. Frazal for putting this whole team together. Thank you for being interested in the Academy. There's a great way of being a member as a medical student to engage with all the resources. And at the end, I'll talk a little bit about some of the cool things we're doing, what the Academy believes in, just to get to know us for our essence. We do things for ourselves. We all have a certain altruism in terms of our efforts reaching out to others, but really we have to find things that appeal to us and finding a way to get through your residency and get the most out of residency. I'm looking forward to hearing the wisdom from our collected folks here in response to your questions. My only little bit of dinosaur advice as I make my little T-Rex short arms and wait for the asteroid is I would not listen to the dinosaurs about how hard residency used to be. It was a different kind of hard back then. So just don't get down when people think, oh, it's so easy now. It ain't right. So just be awesome. Make the boxes, check the boxes, listen, learn. You'll be great. Thank you for letting me be here. I may pitch in a few difficult to contain comments as we go along. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Murati. So this is just some of the questions. I mean, you guys have submitted some absolutely fantastic questions, and we'll get to them, or hopefully all of them here. And but these are just some of them. And please know that this is a recorded session as well. And in the Q&A box, if you want to submit something in the chat, you can do it anonymously if you feel if you want to, and we will try to get to them in the chat as well as address them live as well. All right. And so. So here are our panelists. We have, 9 panelists from multiple different residencies of different sizes and people of different years as well. So I think we have a good varied group here of residents and fellows actually with Haley and Dr. Farzal Zainab is going to be here in a little bit. She's still scrubbed into a case right now. So we have just a quick introduction. We have Hannah, Haley, Zainab, Kirsten, Raisa, Thomas, Kareem, myself, and Kelly. And a lot of the questions that were submitted also had to do with, specifically like what kind of resources to study and those kinds of things. We really didn't want this panel to be too much about specifically studying in particular which kind of books and resources to read. But I will leave this slide up for a while here. This is just something that we've curated as a group that, a lot of these are actually free resources. So hopefully that'll be very helpful to you and will be applicable no matter what residency you go to or what program you're in. But again, we'll leave this up. If you use a QR code that brings you to a Word document as well with all the stuff listed and just go from there. Because the truth is, at every single program, you're going to have your own residents that are going to pitch in on their thoughts on what to read and your own attendings that are going to weigh in on, how you should prepare. So we didn't want this to be too much about that, but we also didn't want to ignore the many, many questions on what kind of resources to use. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with our first question, which was a pretty common one too. What did you wish you had known before starting intern year? And I'll let Haley kind of start us off with that one.
Hey everyone, so I'm the only fellow on the panel, which maybe gives me a certain wisdom. I don't think so. But I think that at least it gives me a little bit of perspective, being removed from the grind of residency. I think what I wish I had known before residency is probably a lot of the stuff that you've been told, which is to try to maintain the excitement that you have now. It's easy to get caught up in the day to day. And I think that the attendings that you work with and the patients that you work with are thinking about the big picture of how do we do best by them. And if you can try to separate yourself from the stress that you're feeling day to day, I think that that will serve you well. I think that it's more of a zooming out perspective. So every time that you're feeling a little overwhelmed, which will happen, it happens to everybody, trying to zoom out and remember how excited you are and how excited you were on match day will really serve you well and keep you in the right headspace, which is probably the most important thing.
One thing, oh, Ressa, go ahead.
I was going to say, to add to that, I think I kind of had heard doom and gloom sorts of things about residency and was very nervous, very, very nervous before starting. And I really did not expect how much fun intern year would be. Certainly there's a whole new level of stress and responsibility that you'll not really be able to appreciate until you're in it. But it's fun and exciting in ways so different from medical school. And everything that you're doing is new for the entire first year with each rotation, whether it's a couple weeks or months, however you guys do it at your programs. So I do think that at least for intern year, that does help to sustain that excitement that Haley was talking about.
I'll just quickly add that also and some of you guys may have taken a year off or taken some time off from medicine before matching. I took a year off before starting residency, and I was worried that like, oh my gosh, I don't know any clinical knowledge, like this is going to be terrible. And I'm sure some of you may feel that way, but the truth is, I think for intern year specifically, it's, what makes a great intern has very little oftentimes with how much clinical knowledge about ENT you actually have. And it's so much more about your communication skills and your ability to follow up on things and how organized you are and how, how you can get things done and just, and how you are a good ambassador for your program when you talk to other teams. And, those kinds of skills are so much more valuable, and don't take any clinical knowledge. It's just someone that's organized and diligent and those kinds of things, going through the list and making sure every box is checked and those kinds of things. So hopefully that's a sigh of relief, but that really is the majority of a lot of intern tasks and running the floor and holding the pager and those kinds of things. So just so you know.
And not to draw out the answer too much, but that same sparkle that you bring to your interviews is the one that's going to carry you through every single year and not just intern year. So I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind.
Haley really likes the word sparkle, apparently. So
I think the taking the time to love yourself, tell yourself what you're doing right too. The nature of residency and feedback is, everybody's trying to make you better. You're trying to make yourself better. And so taking the time to tell yourself what you're doing right, or find somebody who gives that kind of feedback and check in with them regularly, can really help reinforce, why you're there and what you're doing and how far you're coming when you make sure to spend the time to do that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kirsten. I just wanted to add, I think it's also important to keep in mind how essential your role is on the team as an intern. I know at my program, and a lot of programs, as an intern, you're spending a lot of time with patients on the floor, getting to know them, getting to know their families, getting to know their situations at home. And that information is so vital into how we take care of patients as a whole. So just know how important you are to the team, and don't forget that.
All right. So we'll go ahead and quickly move on to our next question. This was a pretty common one, and this is a big question too. How do you keep up with other interests or causes you're passionate about and relationships while being busy in residency? And Pearson, why don't you start us off with that one too, if you don't mind?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I was looking at something else.
It's so how do you keep up with other interests and causes you're passionate about and relationships while being busy in residency?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's really important to be very intentional. If something is important to you and is very much a part of what makes you happy, what makes you who you are, is an interest that you've had for so long, you will be very busy. You'll spend a lot of time in the hospital, but you will have time outside of it. So being very intentional about how you spend that time and using it to do the things that make you happy will be important.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah. I'm a PGY2 at Ohio State. And I would say, just for keeping up with things that just bring you joy, the important thing, I think, is just not to lose sight of those things and prioritize them with what little time you do have. So for me, it was like as simple as making sure to try to get outside every day, be around people, exercise, read. I think it's important to celebrate like the small victories too. That like maybe you didn't get to go for a 2-hour run, but you did get to, get outside for 20 minutes and squeeze that in and call one friend, but maybe not all. And in that way, you kind of have to start being also pretty gentle on yourself, in that, residency is a really tough and demanding time. And I think it's time to have some honest conversations with friends and family and stuff too about, what you're working on and what your day-to-day is like, and being okay. Like if you can't make it to every single event, but you can prioritize, as Kirsten was saying, the ones that are most important to you and can get to. I think we're pretty lucky too to have this type of small, close-knit residency programs, that these programs are small because I think we form relationships with our co-residents, and I think you'll largely find at your programs is very understanding if there is something you really need to get to, or there's something you do need to prioritize, that's you're able to do that and share that. And then, yeah, the last thing I had here in my own little notes was just to be kind of creative with your time too, in that if you're like wanting to hang out with people, that brings you energy, but then also exercise, you can find activities like biking or running, like with residents or with friends. I found like combining those two, combining a couple things in one was really helpful to try to, continue living your best life and all your glory and, pursue all these interests and things that you have and keep them alive, like during this really busy time. So I found that there's no end to trying to find those little outlets and you can make it work truly. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm Kelly. I'm a third year at Vanderbilt. I think that another important aspect is being comfortable saying no. And, for example, I just can't make that wedding that's in Mexico, like I need a weekend to recharge. Like you don't have to go to everything. Sometimes it's really important to take time for yourself. And maybe it's more important to get in an hour cycling and working out than it is to go to a happy hour or something. And it's whatever recharges you, because sometimes you need to be alone. Sometimes you need to be with friends. And that's going to also be especially important when it comes to things that are, academic things. Like you don't have to start taking on research projects as an intern. You don't have to start doing all these extra things. For me, I'm a third year and I'm in research and I'm still dealing with this. Like, man, I could do this other project, but you know what? I've got a lot going on. I don't need to. So, and your family should be very understanding of those things. Your friends should be as well. But it will be difficult to maintain some of those relationships. And so I would really encourage you to nurture the ones that you have and really make sure that you're not taking, your co-residents for granted, your family for granted. You're going to be in the trenches with your co-residents for 5 years, and no one's going to be able to relate to you as well as they can. We're all best friends in my residency. We're really blessed, but we all also have lives outside of each other. We have friends and family we spend time with. And in terms of relationships and keeping those alive and everything, with your parents, with your significant other, I was in a long distance marriage for the first 2 years of residency, and that's like incredibly tough. He's 1,000 miles away, but you still, when you have support and when you have the mental health that you need, the exercise, the sunshine every day, if you can get it kind of thing. It makes all those things so much easier. And when those things are easier, it's going to make getting through residency way easier.
I've got one quick thought. I'm Thomas Edwards. I'm a PGY 5 at Emory. So I would say be really strategic with your time off. So plan ahead, like know when it is, know when you're or know basically when you have a weekend free, and then know when you've got family or sort of friend events coming up, and talk with your co-residents, talk with your upper levels, figure out how to make those line up with when you've got time off. I think Hannah said this, that, it's small programs. If you're thinking ahead and you're communicating with your co-residents, you can usually figure out how to get things covered and basically how to make the best of your time off. So use all of your vacation. Under no circumstance should there be any vacation left at the end of the year, and make sure that you're kind of maximizing that time to maintain those relationships and to maintain your interests outside of the hospital, because you all have them, and that's part of the reason that you got picked for the programs that you're in, and we all want you to continue pursuing those things. So stay on top of your free time.
Some great points. I think just one last thing. The hard part's over. Getting into ENT is one of the hardest parts, right? And so now it's about taking care of yourself. And that's and taking care of your life, and you got to do this for 5 years straight. So just take a deep breath, and the hard part's over. You guys have already matched, and you're going to ENT, or if you haven't matched, you'll get there eventually. So just keep that in mind. So with that, I think we'll go on to the next one. There was a question about what is the right attitude coming into intern year and residency in general. I think Zainab was going to help on this one too, but she's still probably. Oh, she just got here. So I'll start this one. But I think for right attitude, I think your first impression whenever you show up to and people are getting to know you is obviously important. Always look for feedback and always see how you can improve, but also understand that when look for feedback that's actually going to help you in a way. It's not, a lot of times giving feedback to someone that's difficult and that's constructive is one of the most uncomfortable and difficult things to do, especially if it's pertaining to especially if it's not like a technical issue, if it's like a personality issue or how you communicated something to someone. Those are very uncomfortable conversations and also recognize that if a faculty member or a resident or somebody else is giving you that feedback, that's actually a lot. They're taking the time to do that. I know it's everyone's job description to do that, but it's not an easy thing to do. So I think the right attitude is always trying to, always be teachable, and no matter what level, even whether you're an intern or not, and just, take feedback. Don't take it personally. That's very important. Don't take it personally. And don't try to avoid being very, very defensive when you do get feedback, because sometimes a person giving you feedback, it's very difficult for them to do that if all you hear is a bunch of excuses, for example, why this or that happened and stuff. Just know that person is really taking the time to kind of make you better, hopefully, and really kind of teach you some things and give you some insight about yourself. So I think, being eager in the way you guys all are and having that spark for what you're going to do is super important, but also just kind of, keep that teachable mentality going no matter what, where you're at. So.
Hey everyone, sorry I joined late. I got out of the OR a little late here. But yeah, I agree with everything that Kevin said. Essentially, I think being teachable is super important. I think, just to paraphrase, having thick skin is important, just because other people will have bad days sometimes, and occasionally the brunt of that comes out on you. And it can be off-service people, it can be a different service you're calling a consult on for one of your patients, but many times people will, you'll hear things from people that were said in a way that was by no means your fault. So that can certainly happen, and so just sort of going with the flow of things and not taking things personally. I can't stress that enough. I think I definitely lost sleep about something someone said to me here or there as an intern, and then finally got over it and was like, you know what, nobody has time to dwell on this and that, minor issues and things like that. The other thing to remember, I think, is that, you know, you're always like, I don't know, ENTs generally are thought to be, I mean, we are among the, you know, the much nicer of surgeons, like factually speaking. And you have to remember that you're an ambassador of that, right? Like when you're going around the hospital, people, you know, you have to represent that. You have to be helpful. You have to be kind, and you know, people remember how you help them in X way when they reach out to you, or when you call a consult on one of your patients and you have to reach out to them. So I think that's very important too, building those relationships, not just within your department, but throughout the hospital with other folks.
I think one thing that you should always keep in the back of your head is basically putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. So, you know, if you're calling a consult that you would be frustrated receiving, then it's okay for you to say like, hey, I understand that this is a little bit frustrating, or I understand that I'm calling at, you know, a time that may seem inappropriate to you, but, you know, here's the reason that I'm doing it. And, or, you know, when you're in clinic and you're seeing, you know, MAs that you haven't seen in a long time, and, you know, putting yourself in their shoes, you know, there's only a handful of residents that come through and they're going to recognize you, and you see different staff at different facilities all over the place. And it may be hard for you to remember who they are, but, you know that they know who you are and they look up to you. And it's your job to kind of start leading that team, even as an intern. So learning those individuals' names and asking them how their day is and just making them feel like a part of the team goes a long way in getting people on that team, and getting people to where they're really eventually just willing to help you out. I think there's countless times in my residency experience where just because I, you know, am an outgoing, friendly person and have built that rapport with people, I've got a little bit more of a leg to stand on if I'm asking for a favor. So put yourself in other people's shoes and do the things that, you know, make you feel included and welcomed, and remember that it's important for you to do that for other people.
And kind of to echo what Thomas was saying is, you know, we were talking about how you have to give yourself the grace to have fumbles in residency, and like knowing you're going to have some bad days, and offering others that you interact with that same grace to make mistakes and know that others are going to have bad days. And at the end, you're all on the same team, you know, trying to do the best for your patients. And so what's best for that team's functioning is you guys getting along together and just making it work. Because you're going to see others at some really low points in their residencies or in their careers as well. And so you're trying to be supportive to them as possible in those moments.
And I think in general, too, just to you know, kind of go off what Thomas said too, and this also sort of answers Shadi's question here in the chat, you know, as far as quote unquote annoying things, but too, you know, like if you're reaching out to a consulting service or whatnot, you know, like if you don't leave a callback number, that's very impersonal, you know, and if it's just like, okay, consult was placed, and then like they have to go figure out what in the world you're even asking, or even if you're even asking a question. And so obviously the ideal situation would be to do something in person, ask somebody in person, go to their team room, ask them a question, you know, like ICU team, whatever, go and talk to the team and stuff like that, you know, find them on rounds. Now that obviously is not always possible logistically speaking, but having a phone conversation with someone, you know, just so there's not a lot of things lost in translation over an impersonal text or message on IHIS or I mean, Epic or whatever EHR you might use, that there's these, you know, basic human communication things that are so true. And it leads, I think, you know, to have a better relationship with a bunch of different services. Remember, you're going to be calling a lot of people. Oh, I'm going to call ID, and I'm going to talk to pharmacy. Now I'm going to talk to whatever as an intern. You know, to build those relationships early on is super important. I think you can do that a lot better just having more personal communication versus just, you know, a page or, you know, without a callback number or something like that. That would be just a really just a bad etiquette per se. So.
I just want to add, I think to Shadi's question, I think another mistake would be not being willing to ask questions or not knowing the boundaries of your knowledge about what's going on with the patient or logistically what kind of your role is in a situation. Never hesitate to ask someone more senior on your team. You will never be faulted for asking a question that ultimately will be the best for taking care of the patient. So never feel like any question is too dumb, because it's definitely not. We all have the same goal in mind, and doing whatever is best and safest for the patient.
Along those same lines, it's okay to be wrong or to not know, but it's absolutely not okay to be dishonest about that. So I think if something fell through the cracks, that's okay. We'll fix it. Just be honest about it and we'll fix it and move forward. If you forgot to do something, if you did something wrong, that's okay, but just don't lie about it. And, as long as you're open with your teammates and everything, you'll get the job done.
I'd like to interject for a second. This is such an important point. And I think it's easier for me to say this. I have said things that weren't true as a trainee. And I don't remember doing it later on, but the reason people do these things isn't because I am inherently dishonest. It's just I found myself not knowing what the calcium was, and I didn't want to underperform, and I wasn't really sure, but I didn't want to confess to being unprepared, and it's just bad. I mean, it wasn't, I don't think, anything egregious, but it was wrong. And it happens. And when it does happen, it's because you've got too many things to do or something else is going on outside. It's not because we're inherently this or that or the other. So I want to confess this. It is easy to do. And I just really want to just really applaud this for bringing up this topic and being open about it. Just definitely the beginning of all knowledge, right? Those magic words, I don't know. And so just really become comfortable saying this all the time and don't wing stuff, man. I mean, I've done it. I have done it. I haven't heard it, it was years ago, but it's not okay. So don't do better than me.
Yeah, again, so much about being an intern is not how much clinical knowledge you know about science, or whatever. Just just being diligent about everything else. Is so much of what your role is and stuff. So, let's move on. There's a question about how do I make the most of off-service rotations during intern year. Zaida, why don't you take us off with that?
Sure. So, the truth about a lot of off-service rotations is that realistically, you're not going to be using, in some cases, like let's say anesthesia, if you rotate on an anesthesia, you will use that skill set. But there's certain rotations that you may not be using said skill sets much. For instance, like we used to rotate on medical ICU instead of surgical ICU, which has changed since, but there was a lot that like managing diabetes, for instance, DKA, so there's going to be a lot of fluff like that. And you can kind of approach it one of two ways. You can be hands-on and willing to learn and be a team player about it, or you can sort of have an attitude like, oh, this doesn't actually really matter for my education down the road. And kind of what happens when you do care and you do invest, in being like 100% present on whatever off-service rotation you're on, is that honestly, there's people there, they're watching you. They are like, as I mentioned, they're going to be your colleagues, they're going to be your friends. You're going to see them around for 5 to 7 years in the future. And they're going to be folks who are like, if you set things up for yourself, there'll be people who'll have your back across those services. So I think that's super important. But I think generally just being positive. There are things that you'll learn from services that are relatively less relevant that I think are helpful. For instance, when I did ped surgery, I learned a whole, like we were doing lap apps and lap choles and whatnot, but I learned a whole lot about and reviewed, to be honest, a lot of stuff that I hadn't known about, like peds fluids management, for instance, things you learn as an MS3 that you kind of lose as an MS4 because ENT doesn't have that many children on their own service frequently. So stuff like that. There's so much there's, things you can pick up across different services. I did like on trauma, I kind of picked up more on fluid resuscitation as well as the kind of a more enhanced pain pain protocol. So there's things like that I think that are worthwhile. But I think above all, I would stress that you make relationships with other trainees as well as other attendings across services, and those end up being super useful for your training.
Yeah, to echo some of those points and to add a few more, I think you can approach off-service rotations with specific goals in mind. So when you kick off your intern year, a lot of you are going to be in new cities or in new hospitals. And so particularly as I think most of the intern years are comprised of at least 6 months or 50% of off-service rotations, those are times to learn how the hospital works, learn what the other services are about. You're going to be interacting, at least on a lot of the off-service rotations, with teams that you often consult. So it was helpful to me to see, like, what's it like in the ED down here? When do they consult ENT? When do they not? And it's been helpful to carry those learnings forward. And as I am now totally dedicated to ENT rotations, I think developing relationships with other interns who are beyond your program is super helpful, particularly as ENT is a quite small specialty compared to medicine or general surgery. And so that helps to just expand your connections within the hospital and your camaraderie. And then as Zainab was kind of talking about, different skill sets that you're able to bring forward. So you may never do an A-line or a central line again, but it's kind of cool to have that in your toolbox after you've done your ICU rotation. And it's also time to make mistakes and not be on ENT and learn from those opportunities as well. Particularly spending most of my first few months of residency off service, I kind of learned how to deal with the humiliation or the feeling of failure and all that stuff when I was off service. And I felt like that made me a stronger resident once I was on my ENT rotations.
All right. We'll go to the next one. What were qualities you really enjoyed about your upper levels and vice versa? Qualities you discover also unhelpful as well. Haley, why don't you start us off with that one?
Yeah, so I get to jump in right after Raisa, who is one of my juniors from when I was a resident, which is super fun. I actually have a short anecdote to share. When I was a sub-I made what at the time felt like a career-ending mistake. Now I realize that these things happen literally every day, and you learn from them and you move on and you grow. But the thing that I remember specifically about this situation was that the resident at the time, who happened to be actually a mid-level resident, third year, who was covering for the chief resident, was very much insistent that he take responsibility for everything that happened. And like I said, although now looking back, it was a relatively minor thing, watching him say, no, I was the senior on service. This is my responsibility. I should have checked this, or I should have done that, was admirable, both from my standpoint and also from the attending standpoint. And I think that, everyone knows that things happen in residency and everyone's learning. And by taking personal responsibility for your team and what's going on your service, it commands respect from both your juniors and your seniors. And that was something that I internalized, and I hope I might have passed on to some of the people that I worked with. But I think that it's the same thing, being honest and trying your best and reflecting the fact that everyone's trying to do the right thing is ultimately going to serve you well, no matter what position you're in, junior or senior.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've always really respected the senior residents when we have an M&M and it's always the senior or the chief who presents it, because at the end of the day, they are in charge of the service and they are responsible for it. And I really respect that. And it's not pinpointing anything on any one person, because things happen. Another thing I think that is really helpful for me from my senior residents, and I'm sort of at that awkward transition where I'm about to become the senior resident, but I still, I was on call last week and I still called my chief to just ask her about something, and she was super helpful. But I think providing a safety net while not hovering over you is really great. There will be different personality types, but there will be people who are more involved in micromanaging things and people who give you a lot more autonomy. And that autonomy can be scary, but it means that they trust you. And I think that that is huge. If they ask you to do something, it doesn't mean they want you to just do this work. It means that they trust you to do this work and they know that you'll be able to get it done. So I think kind of going in with that mindset is they're not making you do scut work. They know that you'll do a good job and help keep the team functioning. Things that, I already mentioned, things that aren't so great that upper level residents can do is, sometimes the micromanaging thing, I never really get annoyed with it anymore because at the end of the day, I'm still needing help sometimes. And so you'll just kind of learn to navigate those and gain more confidence in saying, no, I can do this. I can do this. Or I can't do this, just like we talked about. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's also okay to say, I feel comfortable doing this. I think that's a huge distinction that you'll have to learn in yourself.
Awesome. We'll move on to the next one here. What were you worried about that you shouldn't have been? Hannah, why don't you take that one on?
Sure. Worried about that I shouldn't have been. I think first of all was not having enough ENT experience and just not knowing nearly enough for what I was about to undertake. I think also it was just in that you don't really have ENT fourth year. I mean, I didn't, at least, except for like end of third year, early fourth year away rotations, and then like nothing the rest of fourth year. And then you're just starting in July on ENT or maybe one of these like off service rotations. But I think that is just absolutely not something to be worried about because every single intern is in the exact same boat. And it's going to feel like drinking from like a faucet that first couple weeks and those first couple rotations, but you just got to soak it all in. And I think the most important thing of beating this like imposter syndrome, that you are facing, I think in the first few months is just to stay humble, stay open-minded, continue to ask just as many questions as you need, never feel ashamed or like embarrassed of doing that. I think resonating with everyone saying like having a good attitude, staying upbeat, positive, open-minded, will just take you so far compared to like just a random fact you memorize. So being that team player, setting those good habits like up front and making it known like that's the kind of resident and team player you are, I think will go way further than trying to cram prior to these experiences. So that was definitely what I was most worried about. And then I think also moving to a city where I didn't really know anyone. So I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and feeling like, how are you going to make friends? This and that. Rest assured, your residency is like an automatic group of people who are also in the same boat and looking to make friends and connections. And I feel like that was, those worries went away instantly as soon as you kind of get in the mix of things. So I think those values and that attitude will carry you far away. So.
Hey, Dr. John, I wonder if there's any advice for those who may be a little more on the introverted side.
It's weird that you asked me that because I feel like I'm the least qualified to answer that.
It was more to farm it out, but go ahead.
Okay.
Irony noted.
But I think what I've observed, certainly people that are more introverted, that just because someone's not saying something or whatnot, as much as someone as loudmouth as I am, does not mean that they're not interested or not engaged or they're not thinking about what's going on, those kinds of things. Certainly finding your voice is important because as an ENT, especially when you show up to the airway situation, you're the one in charge and everyone's looking at you. And sometimes you're the second year resident, you just started call for the first time in your life, and the anesthesia attending is looking at you for what you want to do for the airway plan. Your chief hasn't gotten there, and you're like, oh my goodness, So check your pulse before you walk into any of those kinds of situations. You know, a lot of times the patient's family members, the nurses, the other staff, the other doctors there, especially if they assume that you're going to be the one in charge, they look at your reaction and look at your face and look at how you're responding to the situation. And fake it till you make it. In some way, you have to fake confidence to some degree, and it's a skill that you have to practice and something that you have to experience numerous times before it just comes muscle memory. For whatever reason, like I remember, like as an intern, the blood pressure cuff is on the same arm as the pulse ox, and you see the pulse ox going down. You're like, what is going on, right? And you don't realize it was just because of the blood pressure cuff coming up, but you're getting nervous and those kinds of things. So just kind of being in those scenarios enough will help you through. And there's no way you don't get that kind of confidence through a 5-year program. So I would say, like, even if you are not as extroverted as some of your peers or something like that, there's no way you go through a 5-year program like ENT and you won't come out an extremely, well trained and confident surgeon. But there is no shame in faking it until you make it, I think. So
I think it's nice that there's an established kind of way that things are done in medicine and hierarchy and roles. So if you just start by introducing yourself whenever you arrive at a room or a situation or with a new team and your role, and I think that helps a lot with kind of integrating immediately into your natural role in that environment, even if you are introverted.
I love that. My memorial service, that my fellows know this someday in the future, is going to be an endless loop of sats going up, just played in the background. That's all I want.
Just to piggyback on that discussion, as someone, I'm actually a baseline a little bit more quiet, and I also have a soft voice. And as a second year, it has been certainly a learning experience figuring out how to manage situations as the person on call. And I would say that extroversion and confidence are not mutually exclusive. And with experience will come confidence. And I think one thing that's also hard, like some of my co-residents are like 6'3" tall, like really tall men with loud booming voices. And I am not that person. But when you're in a call situation or an emergency situation, like you walk into a room, you're introducing yourself as the ENT resident, and having a calm, collected composure will take you far. It's really the franticness, disorganization in that moment that will undermine your abilities. It's not necessarily being loud or being the tallest person in the room. And so some of you guys will experience that and figure out your way of dealing with those situations. But there's certainly not one way of managing it.
Yeah, I'm going to echo exactly what Raisa said too, because I've been in that exact same situation, about 5 feet tall, and I'm repeatedly on call with the juniors who are guys at least 6 feet tall, 6 to 6'3". And it is so natural and it is so interesting to walk into a room and like everybody assumes that they're in charge, not me. So like what Raisa said, and also what Kareem mentioned earlier, that you basically walk in, you introduce yourself first, and you let them know that you're in charge, and you basically go from there. To be honest, it's just you do. I also have a super soft voice, and that was something I honestly had to actively work on. And being louder in the OR, being louder in like code emergency situations, like walking in and being like essentially just like introducing myself loudly to everybody and asking where we are, like in terms of the situation in the room. So things like that I think are important. But yeah, I like she said, those things aren't mutually exclusive. So I definitely echo that.
And just the illusion of confidence takes you so far. Even if you're not feeling confident, you really do have to learn how to project that.
Yeah, fake it till you make it, for sure. Just one old thing I wanted to add, because I one of the things that you worried about that you shouldn't. So I had an enormous amount of imposter syndrome. I didn't match coming out of medical school, so I was like, oh my gosh, not only am I going to be not clinically ready, but I don't feel like I belong with any of these people that matched straight coming out of medical school. And especially I think you're amongst a lot of really incredible people, and really smart, really engaged, very academically inclined people. And I just remember going to the first graduation, starting before residency started, and these people that I saw, I mean, they looked like they were incredible. They knew how to do everything and all this other stuff. They were very confident. But you also just know that you deserve to be there. And so much of delivering medicine in terms of like the procedural stuff, a lot of that has nothing to do with how smart you are. You can read about a procedure 1,000 times, but does not mean you're going to be good at that procedure per se. And practicing it as much as you possibly can, getting the muscle memory and doing those kind of things are what's going to get you good at all those things too. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but that you definitely belong. And there is no way you're going to go through a 5-year program with an ENT and not come out just absolutely well prepared, no matter what program you go to. So
to piggyback on that a little bit, I think one of my concerns as a junior resident was basically feeling really bad at simple things. So like ear tubes, tonsils, trachs, like things that are sort of the bread and butter ENT stuff. At the beginning, you're going to be like, man, I am really bad at these things. And that does not feel great initially. And I think, as a junior, I sort of had this expectation that things were just going to like all of a sudden click for everything. And I was going to like become a surgeon. And I think it's really important to realize that it is a progressive process. And, there is not some like magical point where you are just going to be like a surgeon. It's a progressive thing that, at the end of 5 years, you're going to be a safe, competent person that can do sort of the standard things that are expected of an otolaryngologist. But like, when you see an attending do a super advanced case, remember that they did a fellowship and they did, they've been in practice for 10 or 15 years. Just know that it's a progressive process, and don't beat yourself up when like your first ear tube takes you 20 minutes and your first tonsil is a bloody mess. Like just know that that's normal and that you've got to keep trying, and the only way that you're going to get better is to keep doing it. And just don't beat yourself up, and give yourself time to get better.
I have to highlight what Dr. Murati said as the elder in the group. I do think that fake it till you make it is a way to build yourself up internally rather. But I think that it is important to be confident in what you don't know just as much. So as a senior, one of the most frustrating things was dealing with somebody who didn't acknowledge the fact that they didn't know what was going on. And it's much easier to deal with somebody, or to work with somebody rather, that says, I don't know, here's what I saw, I'm very confident in what I saw, than to deal with somebody who says they have this problem. And as somebody who saw vocal cord motion in somebody who's had vocal cord paralysis for 20 years, I promise you're going to see things that aren't there. But if you just say what you saw and are confident in that, people will say, here's what you were probably seeing, and here's how you can learn from that. So confidence, but not being, trying to know too much is important.
So I think that's a great segue to our next question here. Oh, sorry, Kirsten, do you want to say something there?
Oh, it's okay. I feel like I'm being a dead horse here with the whole imposter syndrome thing, but I feel like we all definitely went through it as we started residency. And we've talked about the importance of introducing yourself, especially when you walk into like a call situation and it's chaotic. But even in your day-to-day life, when you're in your PACU and working with new nurses who may not know you, being someone who, one is a woman, one is a person of color, like I was someone who they had not met before. I'm not a nurse, I'm not transport service, or I was very clear in introducing myself as I'm one of the new residents. And so I would say be very intentional, especially to people who may look like me or people who may be different for whatever reason that you feel, or even just being new. Don't be afraid to introduce yourself to people who you will work with every day. Don't assume that they know who you are just because you're there on service. Don't be afraid to tell them who you are.
That's a great piece of advice there. Thank you. So the next question, I think, was how do you gain technical mastery outside of just doing it? Kareem, why don't you start us off on that one?
Yeah, so this is a kind of a tough one, but it starts with, I think, getting more out of doing it. So being well prepared for what you're going to be doing. One of my mentors always told me that every time you do a case, you do it 3 times. You do it before the case, you visually walk yourself through it, through every step, through every motion. Think about what things are going to be difficult for you, what things will be easy for you, and what you want to learn from it. And then you do it during the case, and you have some interactions with your faculty and co-residents during the case. And then you do it after the case again and mentally visualize it. And there's been plenty of studies showing that muscle memory gets more reinforced when you have that mental visualization and walkthrough. And then there's all sorts of training courses that help you improve technical skills outside of the OR. So, a lot of programs now have like workshops, like airway workshops, sinus workshops, and Portal Bone Lab. Taking like maximal advantage of those opportunities will help you develop your skills early. There's if you can find the time, you can start attending these workshops, and they're funded by industry as early as like your intern year. So I went to like a sinus course and a trauma course my intern year, and it was paid for by like whoever was funding the course. And I thought it was like a great experience. In fact, I did like 4 sinus courses in between my first and second year, and I felt like very well prepared for my like sinus rotation then. And same with like the trauma course. I thought that was awesome. And they have all sorts of other courses now too. And then they have things with like simulation, and it helps you mentally run through it. And when you're mentally prepared for things, it leaves more room for you to focus on like the physical aspects of it. So you're getting more out of it. Those are my thoughts. I don't know if anyone else feels differently.
I think it's also important too, like, when you're an intern, nobody's to make sure you set your expectations as well for what you're gonna do. No one's expecting you to be able to do a trach by yourself. No one's expecting you to do a neck dissection. Like, no, you shouldn't beat yourself up, because truly what people are expecting you to learn the most is how do you handle a tissue correctly? How do you hold the belly correctly? How do you cut in the right direction? How do you create tension for yourself? How do you hold a forceps the right way? And that should be what you should be focusing on. It's important to know the steps of I don't know if you're assigned to a laryngectomy, to know some general steps and some general anatomy. But again, no one's going to expect that you can do all these steps, whatever. And it's okay to just focus on the basics and the suturing and the tying and the getting sure your knots are square and the tension is right and those kinds of things. So don't beat yourself up for that. And because truly, if you don't get those foundations right, that's going to show certainly when you're expected to do more. So I think that's just kind of an important expectation that you should set for yourself, especially when you're a junior resident. And then sometimes it can be kind of frustrating too, as an intern, like if you're just the one holding some retractor and everyone else is doing all the fun and whatever, and you can easily zone out and you're kind of staring at the wall. But if you get in the habit of playing a game where, like, if you know the general steps and stuff, and you just kind of look at this most senior person there and just trying to predict exactly how they're going to hold the instrument, how they're going to cut, and exactly where they would cut. And then if they don't do that, then why is it? Or speak up and ask or whatnot, just so at least you're gaining some kind of simulation and trying to predict the next step in the surgery. I think you can learn a lot more from watching. And certainly as a senior resident now, even if I'm not doing the steps, like I'm learning a lot more just by watching actually than just by doing the steps. So just kind of keep that in mind.
So I asked this question when I was a sub-I actually at Emory, and Thomas, your attending, Dr. Chen, told me to brush my teeth with my left hand to get better at using my left hand. I tried it once and it was horrible, and I'll never do it again. So but there are things you can do, that will make you fine tune some motor skills and make you feel kind of like you got practice, even if you're not in the OR. I love painting my nails, and I do it with my loops on. It's kind of fun. And then I love video games. And so, like that will really help you with sinus surgery, actually getting that sort of hand-eye coordination. And I know these things sound silly, but if you need a way to relax and enjoy your Saturday, but you also think maybe I should work on my surgical skills, play a little Skyrim and paint your nails.
That's an awesome response. I love that. We're getting kind of closer to this. I don't see any active Q&A questions. Please feel free to put them in because we're kind of getting close to the end of our talk here. I would say this is a pretty short one. What about best way to organize your daily to-do list? Kareem, you have any quick thoughts on that?
Well, it's really hard to predict the flow of your day, especially as an intern. You're dealing with like consults and floor work and stuff is popping up all over the place. So I always organize my to-do list by priority and by sickness of the patient, at least for like a work to-do list. And then for like a life to-do list, similar thing, make check boxes like Haley's saying, and then have them sub-organized by priority and how urgent it is. And then just go through all the check boxes. It really kind of becomes a little mindless. Trying to keep everything up here is like impossible. You'll always forget. So write it all down and then just make your way through it.
You can definitely make a big splash if you have multicolored pens. Hannah is my source of multicolored pens, and it's amazing. Having a color for morning rounds and stuff to do, and then having a color for PM rounds. That's what I did when I was a head and neck chief. Was just helpful for me, but just having that system, and you'll figure out your system. There's nothing way, but having checkboxes is super important.
And I think, real quick, the thing I want to emphasize is, like they said, putting things down on paper or type, like having it written down somewhere, because we're generally all super high functioning people, and we honestly, through most of our lives, have gotten by without making these lists for ourselves. But you'd be amazed. You get super swamped on certain days, and you can miss major things if you don't make note of them ahead of time. So
to hit that point even harder, I was not a list person before residency, very much against my nature, but I just don't see any way around it. Particularly on the days when you are exhausted and your mind is in a million places, or you're really stressed about a case that you're going to do that you're excited about, you have to write things down so you don't forget them, because you absolutely will. And sometimes there's just too many things to keep organized in your mind. And I feel like my whole brain is on that sheet of paper that I carry around all day.
Save all the numbers. So write down your callback numbers too, along with the notes. And then if you call a number more than once, you should probably save it into your phone. It makes it way easier later when you're calling people back.
And also make sure that you have good shoes, because this is something I did not realize going into intern year. You'll see like a swarm of people in tennis shoes. And then by the end of intern year, they are all like, wow, my feet hurt. I need to invest in the Calzuros or whatever brand it is. But your feet are going to hurt if you're not supported. So
I'll say one last thing. If you have your check boxes, your senior will be even happier that you have your check boxes, because then they can check that off their list. So it helps everyone. Also, I recommend Crocs. I know they're ugly, but they're super comfy and super light.
I like my Allbirds.
Calzuros.
Adidas. I don't know. Y'all are too fancy for me. Although they're pretty disgusting at this point. There's so much drill juice on there. Anyway. So I think we're kind of getting out of time here. I think I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to everyone talk about this. This has just been fantastic. But I just wanted to quickly touch on the fact that, every one of you guys, when you become a resident, you're automatically in the section for residents and fellows. And even when you're a fellow, you're still a trainee. So you're in our organization. And we had a good kind of brief intro talk about what the SRF is. And I won't get into that in detail here, but we work with a lot of different organizations. There are just a tremendous amount of leadership opportunities, grant opportunities, travel fund, humanitarian travel opportunities, core grants. I mean, just endless amounts of stuff that you have access to. So please reach out to us and be a part of this organization and make the most of all those things that are available to you. So there's our website there. The next seminar for you guys was just announced recently. It's being put on not by the SRF, but by the Diversity Inclusion Committee of the Academy. And that's called Diverse Journeys to Otolaryngology. That's on Wednesday, May 19th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So definitely look forward to seeing all you guys there. And then I'll let Dr. Maradi here conclude in this last slide.
Thank you, all the folks for attending and to these great, I was pretty inspired. There's some awesome folks in our field, no doubt about it. And yeah, the D&I committee has a very compelling, I was involved in a little bit of the planning of this, they're coming up in a few weeks. And just to tell a little bit about what the Academy is about as we sign out, under the guidance of Dr. Bradford, Dr. Chandrasekhar and I are chairing the national the giving campaign for the Academy. This isn't a pitch for students and residents to give. You're welcome to. That's not the expectation. But I think this is a good example of just who we are. And the 4 areas of giving that we're asking all the members, really have to focus on wellness, on leadership development, specifically on education, and on initiatives related to diversity and inclusion, in particular, as Dr. Powell taught me, inclusive diversity. So we wanted to make sure that, and this is an example of what organization you're getting involved with, that it really has to do with hearing you, responding to you, and I hope collecting our thoughts and then directing them back out to our community, that whether it's your education going to your neighbor, vice versa, you're giving focus on the things you're passionate about, because ultimately we're all otolaryngologists, but we all have our own journeys. So I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate the Academy, Dr. Bradford, supporting this ongoing initiative, and congratulations to Dr. Farzal and her committee. Dr. John is our host today. Great job. Thanks to the Academy staff.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.